The rain came down soft, like it knew not to interfere with Calder Bridge. It had always been that way, as if the old stone arch had an unspoken agreement with the sky. Cassian Holt stood at the edge, hands deep in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the water swirling beneath. It was strange, standing there without Merritt. For as long as he could remember, there had never been one without the other. He could still hear their laughter echoing off the stones from when they were boys, swearing a silly pact, no matter what, they'd rise together. They'd even cut their palms, pressing them together like they'd seen in films, believing the bridge had sealed their promise. But now, Cassian wasn't so sure about pacts. Or Merritt Fay. A week ago, they had both applied for the same job, overseeing the restoration of the village's old courthouse. It wasn't just any job. It was the job. The one Cassian had worked his whole life towards, scraping through apprenticeships, learning the language of timber and stone when others chased office chairs and titles. Merritt had applied too, though he'd shrugged it off like it was just something to try. Yet, when the letter arrived, it wasn't Cassian's name printed at the top. It was Merritt's. Everyone in town had heard by evening. Merritt, with his easy grin and charm, had landed the position. People clapped him on the back at the pub that night, raising glasses as if it was all as it should be. Cassian didn't go. He had sat in his workshop, staring at the rough blueprints he'd drafted for the courthouse, the ones no one would see now. He tried not to feel betrayed. But how do you stop a wound from aching when it's being paraded around as someone else's victory? It wasn't until late the next day that Cassian's world tilted for real. He had gone to Merritt's workshop, partly because he couldn't keep the silence anymore, partly because he wanted to see if Merritt would offer an explanation. The place was empty, as expected. But a stack of papers on the bench caught Cassian's eye. Among them was a letter, addressed to the project board. Cassian's breath stalled as he read. It was a glowing recommendation. For him. Written by Merritt. I've seen Cassian Holt craft with more heart and history than anyone in this village. He is not just the right choice, he is the only choice. But the letter was crumpled. Unsigned. Unsent. Cassian's stomach turned. His best friend had written a letter to lift him up, and then never sent it. Why? Did Merritt get cold feet about losing the job to him? Or had it all been a game to make Cassian feel grateful for a gesture that was never meant to matter? He felt his fist tighten around the paper, the weight of betrayal pushing down on him. The pact. Their pact. What did it mean if Merritt could just forget? The village bell tolled as he stepped out, the sky now a dull bruise of grey. Cassian knew where Merritt would be. Calder Bridge had always been their place for hard conversations. But when he arrived, Merritt wasn't there. Only the river, moving on, like it didn't care. The days that followed were colder. Not just in weather, but in everything. Merritt didn't reach out. Cassian didn't either. The village carried on, pretending not to notice the fracture between the two lads of Calder Bridge. Cassian found himself working longer hours on small jobs, repairing Mrs. Hawthorne's garden fence, fixing the pews at St. Alaric's church. Anything to stay busy, anything to drown out the whispers in his head. But the bitterness wouldn't fade. Every time he saw Merritt's name on village flyers, every time he overheard people praising the new project manager, the bitterness sharpened. Until the night the sirens wailed. Cassian had been walking home from a late job when he saw the smoke. It curled up into the sky like a dark, accusatory finger. The sawmill. Merritt's family sawmill. Flames licked at the old wood as firefighters battled to contain it. Cassian didn't hesitate. Before he knew it, he was running, heart pounding, memories flashing. Two boys climbing those very beams, dreaming of the future. Merritt was there, shouting, trying to fight off men in uniforms who were pulling him back. His face was wild, panicked. And when his eyes met Cassian's across the blaze, there was no project manager standing there. No betrayal. Just Merritt. His best friend. But the crack in Cassian's chest didn't heal instantly. No. It sat there, throbbing, as the fire raged on. That night, after the flames had died, after the sawmill stood as a blackened skeleton, Cassian found himself alone again on Calder Bridge. He hated that he still cared. He hated that even after everything, the letter, the silence, the betrayal, A part of him still wanted to fix things. But fixing broken wood was easier than fixing broken friendships. The river below didn't care. It kept moving. Yet something inside Cassian whispered, if they didn't fix this, they'd drown in the current. The smell of smoke still hung in the air, even days after the fire. The sawmill stood like a wounded soldier, its charred beams reaching out as if asking for mercy. The town had fallen quiet. No one knew what to say. The Fay family's sawmill had been there for generations. It was more than wood and nails. It was called a village's backbone. Cassian hadn't seen Merritt since the night of the fire. He didn't want to. He didn't know what he'd say if he did. Anger still burned inside him, but now, it was mixed with something heavier. Guilt, maybe. Or regret. He couldn't tell. He spent his days working, fixing things that didn't really need fixing. Anything to stay away from the silence of his thoughts. But the village was small. And gossip traveled faster than smoke. Heard Merritt's looking for funding to rebuild, said old Mr. Braxton at the pub. Won't be easy, not with the project board breathing down his neck. Cassian said nothing. He took a slow sip of his ale and kept his eyes on the wooden counter. He knew what that meant. Without the sawmill, the courthouse restoration would stall. Merritt's fancy promotion would be hanging by a thread. And the board would be watching, waiting for a reason to cut him loose. A part of Cassian thought, serves him right. But another part, the part that remembered their pact, remembered the boy who once stood beside him on Calder Bridge, felt sick. That night, Cassian found himself outside the sawmill. He wasn't sure why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something else. The place looked worse in the moonlight. Blackened, hollow, dead. And yet, in the ruins, he saw something. A beam, cracked, but not broken. It was from the old section of the mill, the part he and Merritt had helped repair as kids. Cassian's hands moved before his mind could stop them. He grabbed the beam, testing its strength. Still solid. Still standing. Just like their friendship could be, if they didn't let pride finish the job the fire had started. But he couldn't just walk up to Merritt, not after everything. The wounds were too fresh. So he decided to do what he knew best. He'd rebuild. Quietly. Silently. The next night, Cassian returned with tools. Alone. He started clearing debris, stacking salvageable wood, working under the cover of darkness. His muscles ached, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Piece by piece, he'd fix the sawmill. Not for Merritt. For the village. For the pact. The nights blurred together. Cassian would finish his day jobs, then slip into the sawmill ruins after sunset. The work was slow, but steady. And in that silence, he found a strange peace. But the village wasn't blind. People began to notice. A plank set upright, a beam no longer leaning. Whispers spread. Cassian Holt's working the mill alone. Some called it foolish. Others, noble. Merritt heard the whispers too. One night, as Cassian hammered a new brace into the frame, he heard footsteps behind him. He didn't need to turn. He knew that gait. You a stubborn bastard, you know that. Merritt's voice was raw, strained. Cassian kept working. Takes one to know one. Silence hung between them, heavier than the beams. You think this fixes things? Merritt asked, stepping closer. The sawmill? Us? I'm not fixing us, Merritt, Cassian said, his jaw tight. I'm fixing what you let burn. Merritt's laugh was bitter. You think I wanted this? You think I planned for the mill to go up in flames just to ruin your day? Cassian turned then, eyes sharp. You didn't send the letter. Merritt's face hardened. Because I never got the chance. My dad, he was the one who said he'd deliver it. He's been forgetting things. Misplacing keys, bills. I thought it was just old age. Merritt's voice cracked. I found the letter crumpled in his desk 2 days after the decision was made. Cassian's breath hitched. The ground shifted under him. You lying. I wish I was. Merritt's eyes were glassy now. I wrote that letter because I knew you deserved the job more than me. But I also knew what the board wanted. Polished speeches. Clean hands. Not someone who's got sawdust in their hair. Cassian looked away, the anger deflating like a punctured tire. The betrayal he'd clung to was slipping through his fingers. I applied for that job to protect you, Cass, Merritt said softly. I thought if I took the hit, I could shield you from the corporate crap. But I screwed it up. Like I screw up everything. For the first time in weeks, Cassian saw Merritt, not as a rival, but as his friend. The one who'd once dared him to jump off Calder Bridge into the freezing river, swearing they'd fly before they'd fall. Cassian sighed, shoulders heavy. You an idiot. Merritt gave a weak smile. Takes one to know one. They stood in the half-rebuilt sawmill, surrounded by wood, ashes, and memories. The distance between them wasn't so wide now. I've been working on this every night, Cassian muttered. Figured you'd come around eventually. Merritt's eyes softened. Figured you'd need someone to correct your mistakes. Cassian chuckled, the tension breaking. We rise together, remember? Merritt stepped forward, offering his hand. Pact still stands, Cass. Cassian took it. The grip was firm. Solid. Like that beam they'd saved years ago. But Cassian knew. Fixing a sawmill was simple compared to fixing trust. Still, they had to start somewhere. And Calder Bridge was waiting. The sawmill was alive again. Slowly, painfully, but alive. Cassian and Merritt worked like men possessed. Daylight hours were for the village, the polite thank yous and silent nods from neighbors. But nightfall was for the mill. No words, no pretenses, just the rhythmic thud of hammers, the rasp of saws, and the occasional muttered curse when a beam didn't quite fit. The air between them was different now. Not quite mended, but not broken. It was like rebuilding the mill mirrored their own bond. Each plank, each nail, a step towards something they'd almost lost. Yet, something still gnawed at Cassian. Merritt had admitted the truth about the letter, about his father's illness, about trying to protect Cassian from a corporate world that chewed up craftsmen and spat out hollow titles. But it didn't erase the silence that had followed. The weeks of avoidance. The bruising feeling of being left behind. Cassian didn't know if Merritt had stayed away out of guilt, or pride, or simply not knowing how to fix what had cracked between them. And now, with the sawmill half rebuilt, Cassian feared they were patching up wood, but not the wound that mattered. One evening, as they were fitting a heavy crossbeam, Merritt let out a sharp grunt, dropping his end. Cassian rushed over. You all right? Merritt winced, rubbing his shoulder. Fine. Just the universe reminding me I'm not 20 anymore. Cassian wasn't convinced. He noticed the pallor in Merritt's face, the way his hands trembled slightly. But he said nothing. They worked in silence again. Later that night, after Merritt had left, Cassian found a crumpled envelope tucked into the sawdust near the bench. Curiosity prickled. It was addressed to Merritt, from the project board of Calder Heritage Trust. The seal was broken. Inside was a letter dated weeks ago. Cassian's eyes scanned the words. Your position as project manager will be reviewed pending the sawmill's restoration progress. Failure to deliver satisfactory results will result in termination of the village's restoration project and reassignment to an external firm. Cassian's pulse quickened. Termination? Reassignment? That meant the courthouse project, the very heart of Calder Village, was hanging by a thread. And Merritt had said nothing. It all made sense now. Merritt wasn't just fighting to save his reputation. He was fighting to save the entire village project. Alone. Cassian felt a sick twist in his gut. Merritt had taken the weight of that failure on his own shoulders, carrying it silently while everyone else clapped him on the back or whispered behind closed doors. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Cassian was at Merritt's door before sunrise. The house was quiet. He knocked, but no one came. His gut told him where to go next. Calder Bridge. Sure enough, Merritt was there, sitting on the edge, legs dangling over the water like they used to when they were kids. His face was pale, dark circles under his eyes, but his expression was calm. Resigned. Cassian sat beside him without a word. I suppose you found the letter, Merritt said after a while. Cassian nodded. Why didn't you tell me, Merritt? Merritt shrugged. What would it have changed? I took the job to shield you, Cass. If I fail, it's on me, not you. That's not how this works, Cassian said, voice tight. We made a pact, remember? We rise together. Not you protect me while you drown. Merritt chuckled bitterly. Seems like I'm not very good at either. The river flowed beneath them, quiet and steady. You think you're the only one who feels like a fraud? Cassian said suddenly. I've been working my whole life with my hands, Merritt. But when that letter didn't come, I started thinking maybe I was just fooling myself. Maybe charm and connections matter more than skill. That's not true, Cass. Isn't it? Cassian's voice cracked. But that's not the point. The point is, if we fall together. You don't get to make that decision alone. Merritt was quiet, eyes lost in the water. I'm tired, Cass, he whispered. Tired of being the face that smiles when everything's crumbling behind it. Tired of pretending I'm the man this village needs. Cassian put a hand on his shoulder. You're not. We are. A gust of wind swept over them, cold but refreshing. For a moment, it felt like the bridge was listening. That evening, everything changed. Cassian and Merritt called a village meeting. It wasn't in a fancy hall or some office. It was at the sawmill, amidst the half-rebuilt beams and lingering scent of ash. They stood side by side, Cassian with his rough hands, Merritt with his tired charm, and told the village the truth. About the board's threats. About the sawmill's importance. About how Calder Village's heritage wasn't a contract to be passed around, but a living, breathing thing built by its people. And the village responded. Carpenters, laborers, even old Mrs. Hawthorne, who couldn't lift a plank but could make a mean pot of tea, came forward. They didn't have corporate budgets or polished titles, but they had something better. Heart. The sawmill transformed into a battleground, not of loss, but of defiance. The village became a crew, working side by side, led by Cassian and Merritt. The courthouse restoration wasn't just back on track, it was reborn. But the twist wasn't over yet. A week later, a sharp-suited man from the project board arrived, clipboard in hand, ready to deliver the inevitable bad news. But what he saw left him speechless. A sawmill, rebuilt not by contracts, but by community. A courthouse restoration progressing ahead of schedule, not by external firms, but by people who knew every crack and creak of its stones. And standing at the front, Cassian Holt, with sawdust in his hair and blueprints in his calloused hands. The board had no choice. They had to acknowledge what the village had done. But it didn't stop there. The local press caught wind of the story. Calder Village saves its own, the headlines read. Suddenly, what was once a failing project became a symbol of community resilience. And Cassian, the man they had once overlooked, became the face of it all. That night, as the village celebrated under the soft glow of lanterns, Merritt pulled Cassian aside. Looks like you the man they need after all, Cass. Cassian smiled. Only because you were too stubborn to let me walk away. Merritt raised his glass. To stubbornness, then. Cassian clinked his glass. And to the pact. They didn't need grand speeches. Calder Bridge stood just beyond them, its silent arch holding their history. But for the first time in a long while, the future looked solid. The autumn wind carried a different sound now. It wasn't the lonely rustle of forgotten leaves or the sharp whistle of empty promises. It was laughter, the thud of hammers, the scrape of wood against stone. Calder Village was alive. Truly alive. The courthouse stood proud, its ancient walls breathing new life. Where once there were cracks and peeling plaster, now stood beams of fresh timber, polished floors, and windows that let the morning sun dance inside. But what made it beautiful wasn't the restoration. It was the fingerprints of everyone who had touched it. You could feel it, in every corner, every nail, every carefully sanded edge. Cassian stood at the far end of the hall, watching as villagers filled the space, their voices warm, their eyes shining. Merritt was somewhere in the crowd, probably charming someone into a smile. Typical Merritt. Cassian's thoughts drifted back to the bridge, to the night when everything had nearly shattered. And yet, here they were. But the story wasn't done. The project board had returned. This time, with cameras, notebooks, and forced smiles. They wanted to turn Calder Village into a poster child. A shining example of community-led restoration. It made Cashin's skin itch. They wanted the victory, but none of the fight that had built it. After the speeches, the applause, and the official photographs, Merritt found Cassian leaning against the old courthouse door. "You looked like you wanted to hit that board chairman when he called us local heroes," Merritt smirked. Cassian shook his head. "He doesn't get it, Merritt. None of them do. This wasn't about saving a building. It was about saving who we are." Merritt's smile softened. "And yet, you stood up there, smiled for the cameras, didn't throw a single punch. You growing up, Cass." Cassian rolled his eyes. "Or maybe I just realized something." "Oh? Enlighten me." "That we don't need their approval. The bridge, the mill, the courthouse, they were never about them. They are ours. Always have been." Merritt clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Then let's make sure we never forget that." As evening fell, the village gathered at Calder Bridge. Lanterns lined the railings, casting golden reflections onto the water. It was a tradition now, to end every project, every victory, at the place where it all began. Cassian and Merritt stood at the center, side by side. There were no fancy speeches, no declarations, just a quiet understanding that after everything, the fire, the anger, the silence, they were still here, together. An old villager, Mr. Greaves, approached with a wooden plaque. "Thought you boys might want this," he said with a grin. Cassian took it, running his fingers over the carved letters. "The Pact of Calder Bridge, we rise together." For a moment, Cassian felt the lump in his throat rise. Merritt, for once, was silent too. They mounted the plaque onto the bridge, right where they had carved their initials years ago. It felt right. Solid. Like the past and present shaking hands. The village cheered. But for Cassian and Merritt, the true victory was quieter. A shared glance that said, "We made it." Not as rivals. As brothers. Later, as the crowd thinned and lanterns flickered low, Merritt nudged Cassian. "You know," Merritt began, "when we were kids, I always thought you'd be the one to leave Calder. Big city dreams, fancy workshops." Cassian laughed. "Funny. I always thought you'd be gone first. Climbing some corporate ladder." Merritt smiled. "Turns out, we are just two stubborn idiots who can't let go of a bridge." Cassian looked out at the water, its surface smooth and endless. "Or maybe we are exactly where we are supposed to be." Merritt nodded. "Pact still stands." Cassian extended his hand. "Pact still stands." They shook on it, just as they had when they were boys. But this time, it wasn't a promise made on childish dreams. It was a vow forged through fire, loss, and the stubborn, relentless will to stand back up. As they walked off the bridge, the village behind them glowing with life, Cassian knew something deep in his bones. The world could burn down their sawmills. Boards could ignore their letters. But as long as Calder Bridge stood, so would they. Together. True strength isn't in standing alone but in standing together. When pride and silence are set aside, and people choose unity over ego, even the deepest wounds can be healed, and what seemed lost can be rebuilt stronger than before. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that inspire, challenge, and stay with you.